Hi, my name is Cailean Babcock with Overclocked Imagination, and I'd like to do a scene breakdown for you today. This is an interview that was shot for a movie I'm working on called Spindle, and I just want to show you a brief clip here.
On the subject of nanotech, as you're well aware, in the last few years, we've seen outbreaks of self-replicating nanomachines in places like Madrid, Tel Aviv, Singapore, and most recently, Sapporo.
Yes, terrible situations.
Okay, there you go. Now, this is two shots that were filmed 6 months apart in two separate apartments with some really awful green screen. And the footage itself was pretty low quality. We used a DV camera shooting at 480p. It's an old camera. This was shot quite a bit ago. So, you know, let's just say it was a bit of film school as we went along. As you can see here, here's the final shot. I think it turned out pretty good. And here's what it looked like before. The most important thing to know here is that DV footage uses 441 compression, which means that not only is it 480p, which means you don't have a lot of pixels to start with. There's only one color pixel stored for every 4 pixels of light and dark. So that means that traditional green screen software is going to have a bit of a time. But to get a clean comp, so what I did is in this case, went into Mocha. And I went ahead and rotoscoped the footage. And the final matte looks a bit like this. As you can see, I did it in pieces. It doesn't matter that wobbly bit on the inside being the hard holdout for the face, but that very solid blue outline being the soft holdout for the hair is really key. And I did it in pieces because that gives me more control later when it comes to tweaking the matte settings for different parts, as well as simplifying the a number of points I have to deal with. Certain things will change or completely vanish from the outline as the scene moves on, and it's silly to try to keep those points when they're no longer even effective. And this also gave me the opportunity to do a holdout for just the glasses themselves, because you don't want important stuff like that disappearing and giving away the fact that it's a green screen shot. So back in After Effects, as I said, I brought in the final pieces in layers: left ear, right ear, hair, neck, face, glasses, etc. And I was able to tweak it on a case-by-case basis, especially with the left ear. If you look at that, because this was DV compressed, you can really see the color problem around the ear. And you can see the jagged pieces and how the color tends to blur between the flesh tones and the green, and that's not good. But when you get over here, when you have the final footage here, it looks nice and clean. One of the things I'm proud of that I was able to nail down here was the hair. You can see it actually has a nice soft edge. It doesn't chatter, which is important. Chatter as in feels like, the hairs are wiggling around and you get a nasty jagged line. And I didn't have to sacrifice and give him some kind of strange helmet head. So you get that, again, that added step of realism. And the final trick was being able to take the digital set with the digital chair and have the actor interact with it. And I want to show you how I did that. So the digital set I built in Modo over here. If you do this, you can see an interactive preview start to build. Maybe not. There it goes. Okay. And as you can see, that is the actual chair that was shown in the final. Now, we don't have time to waste watching this slowly build up, but I'll show you the chairs themselves. As you can see down here in the lower window, or more importantly, in the UV editor. I built this in Modo. I was able to use Modo's excellent UV mapping tools to create a nice, tight, mapped texture that I would be able to use using cloth layers, specular and diffuse and so forth. And then finally, I was able to use different outputs to create 2 Z-depth maps, one for the shadow blur and one for the depth of field. Now, the reason why I did 2 of these is because, one, depth of field, I wanted to be able to clamp it at 10 meters. As you can see in After Effects, I'll show you real quick what that looked like. And so there's the Z depth map that we'll be using for the camera's depth of field. And that allows me to blur out the window in the background and give it a nice feeling of a studio camera that actually is able to focus in tight on him and gives you a nice professional feeling. And then the second one is one that is unclamped. Now the problem with the unclamped is you're not going to get necessarily get a usable RGB visual preview in After Effects. Now, this is an earlier version of After Effects. Later versions may have dealt with this, but as you can see, from the human eye's perspective, there's just nothing there. This is because it is floating point, and After Effects would have to remap it into an 8-bit depth image, 8 bits per channel, for that to actually show up. So it was nice to be able to have at least the clamp version just for a sanity check, because when I first did this, I thought I was losing my mind. As you can see here. But the problem with this one is you lose all of the geometry of the chair. It becomes a flat shape, which is no good for our shadows, because we want them to fill the creases here and conform to the shape of the pillow. This is where I get a little bit more believability is more important than realism in this particular composition. So what I did is I came into my virtual set, which I'm going to open up right here, and I created 2 solids, just a straight up magenta color that kind of matched what a shadow would look like against that chair. I actually sampled off the values in the creases. And I went ahead and applied that floating point image as a displacement map. So first I set a matte just using the silhouette of our actor, followed by the displacement map and then a little Gaussian blur. And I just basically imagined 2 studio lights shining down on him, represented by studio lights in my 3D scene, and said, yeah, sure, this is what would happen in our virtual set. Then I also applied a gradient as a roll-off for the top of the cushion, and of course to mask off the edges, because we only need to have those shadows on the chair, not on the window or anything like that, because that would just be weird. And the final result is this. Now, one last thing I added for realism is, as I said, I had the holdout for the glasses, of course, which turned out pretty well. Then I also had a light wrap, which looks like this. And it's important that those 2 magenta layers, those 2 solids, went into what I call the virtual set complete. So, I need to be able to, if you're using a node-based compositor, not a layer-based compositor, such as Blackmagic's Digital Fusion or Nuke or something like that, you're going to have to just basically make sure that it's actually a little bit more visually easy to follow than the layer version. But yeah, you'll need to have your final rotoscoped or matted actor twice and be able to pipe that in so that you can have the shadows in the background. And when you apply it as a light wrap, you don't want to have the virtual set in there twice, but the light wrap ignores the shadows. You want where the area is shadowed, where the chair is shadowed, should not be contributing to the light wrap, obviously. This is a very important thing. If you try this effect, if you try to do this and say, well, I'm getting this weird halo, say, for example, between the edge of his face here and his neck going down towards the shoulder, this area here should not have any of the chair without the shadow. That's a key thing to be careful not to overlook. And then finally, I added a little bit of match grain to the virtual set, sampled off the original footage so that it would seamlessly integrate. And as much as the original footage, left a little bit to be desired, you're never going to get perfect footage, but at least it felt like it integrated. And that and a little TLC and color tweaking, I came out with this final result. I think it turned out pretty good. This is not about evangelizing the software I'm using. It's about talking about concepts and techniques. So this can be done in any professional software program, or as you can see, combination of programs. And mainly what we're talking about here was focusing on getting an actor to interact with the 3D environment in a way that it's a minor detail, but it sells it. Remember, it's not just about complete realism, where you have realistically calculated global illumination, or you're able to import your 3D set directly into your compositor and therefore be completely true. Sometimes you don't have that luxury. Sometimes, you don't have the time or the budget. But if you can pull it off, if you know these kinds of concepts, you should be able to pull it off no matter what. And so that's what I'm hoping this will help you with when you are faced with this kind of challenge. So I hope you find this useful. If you have any questions or comments, drop me a line at Cailean@overclockedimagination.com. And I'll see you next time.